Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled An Aviation Legend Most People Have Never Heard of, Bob Gilliland. Now, most people know about the SR-71, the Blackbird. It's a very famous aircraft, but a lot of people, and I've taken a few little samples here of, do you know who Bob Gilliland is? And no, not a clue. Well, that's the interesting thing about a lot of these test pilots. They're very humble. They are as amazing pilots as they are humble, and a lot of people don't really know who they are. So I want to tell you about Bob. Now, I met Bob at Society Experimental Test Pilot Symposium. Bob is a fellow in the Society Experimental Test Pilots. That's the highest membership position you can have. I'm a member in SETP, and that's my wife there. This picture we took when we first met him over in Regensburg in a symposium that was occurring over there. And Bob is just a fascinating guy to talk to. And like a lot of these guys, he is extremely gracious. Okay, to call me a fellow test pilot, no, I didn't do the first flight of the SR-71, and that's what Bob did. Bob conducted the very first flight of the SR-71, tail number 17950, back in December 22nd, 1964. Now, of course, this program was a secret for a good 10 years after that. But the interesting thing was, as part of the contract with the Air Force, they had various requirements to meet. And one of them was before the end of the year, they were supposed to have the first flight and the first supersonic flight. And they were coming up against the end of the year, obviously, and they hadn't flown. And Bob says he's talking to Kelly Johnson, and they're going to get a flight out. And Bob says, well, why don't we just combine them? He says, I'll hold 400 knots indicated up to 50,000 feet. That'll take us supersonic. I'll do a climb up to 50,000 feet, pull the power back to idle and descend, and that'll achieve the first flight and the first supersonic flight. So they did. He flew up to 50,000 feet, hit about Mach 1.5, and that was the very first flight of the SR-71. Now, Bob was quite an interesting guy. He was an Air Force pilot, flew an F-84 in combat in Korea, came back, went through the test pilot school. Actually, at that time it was called the Aerospace Research Pilot School. Went through that, flew virtually everything in the inventory, and became an expert instructor in the F-104. Now, to give you an idea of how good of skills Bob had, Bob ended up flying 5 dead stick patterns in the F-104. Engine failures, coming around, landing. Now, if you saw my presentation on doing simulated shuttle approaches, the thing comes out of the sky like a brick. So that's a pretty amazing feat to do 5 of them. But I knew some of the test pilots out there as young second lieutenants had a couple of these under their belt. But 5 is quite a story. But he was a senior instructor on it, so I got a lot of time in it. And he was chosen by Kelly Johnson to be the chief test pilot on the SR-71. It's kind of interesting. Bob and I had a lot of discussions over a few beers and that. And virtually every disaster accident that you read about in the SR-71, unstarts, engine fires, all sorts of stuff like that, he pretty much has experienced. He never had to bail out of the aircraft, but he has more flight test time at Mach 3 than any other pilot in history. And unfortunately, Bob recently passed away. But he autographed a few nice posters for me. And like I said, a lot of these guys are very humble, wonderful, magnanimous, and gracious people. And Bob was just a super guy, and he passed away recently. And I just want everybody to know who this guy was. And, it goes without saying he was an amazing test pilot for what he did, but he was just an absolute wonderful individual, gentleman. And he would talk to somebody like me who was really low on the rung of test pilots, and would treat us as equals. And that was the neat and gracious thing about a man like this. And that's why it was such a pleasure to have known him. I hope you enjoyed my little story about Bob. Thanks for watching.